Joseph Bellamy was a Congregationalist pastor in the colony of Connecticut during the 1700s. He was a giant of a man. He stood 6'5", weighed 300 pounds, and had a powerful presence. But more importantly, he had a huge impact for Christ in the New England colonies, both during and after the Great Awakening. Joseph Bellamy was born in Cheshire, Connecticut on February 20th, 1719. He graduated from Yale in 1735 when he was 16 years old. It was after his graduation that he began to earnestly seek the Lord, which led to his salvation. And very shortly after being saved, Joseph Bellamy surrendered to preach. He prepared for the ministry under Pastor Jonathan Edwards in Northampton, Massachusetts for about 2 years, and he was licensed to preach at 18 years of age. In November of 1738, he went to a newly settled area in the western part of the colony of Connecticut known as the North Purchase. His plan was to preach to the settlers there for 5 months, but he wound up preaching there every Sunday for 15 months. The settlers obtained a temporary license from the colony to hold church services, and during that time, Joseph Bellamy preached in a barn. Bellamy wrote that the sermons had a visible effect upon many of the people, especially the youth. On a daily basis, people were seeking out young Bellamy for spiritual guidance, and he had the opportunity to lead many of them to faith in Christ. In late 1739, the settlement was incorporated as Bethlehem, Connecticut, the name recommended by Joseph Bellamy. In February of 1740, the congregation invited 22-year-old Bellamy to be their pastor. In March, they officially organized as a church with 45 members. And in April, they ordained Joseph Bellamy and installed him as their pastor. The church records state that the young pastor would preach 4 or 5 times every week, and that, as a result, quote, religion was greatly revived and flourished wonderfully. Every man, woman, and child about 5 or 6 years old and upwards were under religious concerns more or less. Quarrels were ended, frolics flung up, prayer meetings begun, and matters of religion were all the talk. Many people were converted. By this time it was 1741, and the Great Awakening was roaring through the New England colonies. People throughout Connecticut were hearing how the Lord was working in the little village of Bethlehem, and Pastor Bellamy was invited to preach in numerous places. In the space of 2 years, beginning in March of 1741, Joseph Bellamy preached 458 times in 213 places, not including his own church in Bethlehem. He received letters from all over New England, including one from a leading member of the church in Hartford, Connecticut, which stated, "I have often heard of your zeal for the Lord and your compassion towards the perishing world, and I long to have you lend your endeavors for the further awakening, convicting, and carrying along such a secure people as we are, and for beating down the opposition that so mightily exerts itself among us." The opposition of which this man from Hartford wrote included the people called the Old Lights. The Old Lights were the people in the colonies who were rejecting the Great Awakening, choosing to be content with the cold, dead religion of the state churches. When Joseph Bellamy was invited to preach in Wallingford, Connecticut, a group of the Old Lights there vowed that if he were to come there to preach, they would greet him with clubs and stones. Bellamy went to preach in Wallingford anyway, and not only was he not harmed, but the Lord blessed his preaching there abundantly. Joseph Bellamy was a year younger than David Brainerd, and serving the Lord in Connecticut together, they became good friends. David Brainerd was licensed to preach in Danbury, Connecticut on Thursday, July 29, 1742. The next day, Brainerd rode his horse 30 miles to Bethlehem, where he preached his first sermon on Friday, July 30th. On March 7, 1743, Bellamy wrote to Brainerd, "I read your letter of February 4th and loved you and pitied you and felt a sweet mixture of grief and sorrow and joy. You seem dearer to me than all the world beside." Joseph Bellamy established a school to train preachers, the first school of theology in America. It is a one-room building, roughly 8 feet by 12, with a wood stove inside. The building is still standing, Behind the house where Bellamy and his family lived, he and his wife Frances raised 8 children together. On the street in front of their homestead is a historical marker which reads, "In this house, Reverend Joseph Bellamy held the earliest theological school, 1738 through 1789. Joseph Bellamy authored 22 books, the best known being True Religion Delineated. He pastored the church in Bethlehem for the rest of his life. After suffering a stroke, Joseph Bellamy died in 1790 at 71 years of age, and he's buried in the town cemetery on Bellamy Lane in Bethlehem, Connecticut. Christian, there's nothing more fulfilling than to find and live out God's will for your life. Stay the course.